Hi, my name is Nathan Bukovich. I'm the athletic director for Westridge University, that is a mid-size Division One institution. Just a little bit overview about what is going on here right now. We are in some financial trouble that has to go with the football team. The football organization was not really one of the best ones, but the head coach came in the past 3 years. They really have turned it around. The first year didn't do so well. Second year came with an 8-4 record. Last one, this past season, came with a 10-2 record and an actual bowl appearance, which is very good. The only thing is, though, there's a lot of money that goes into the coaching staff, and there's a lot of revenue, but there's more expense. Within particular, they make a lot of revenue, $18.5 million, but their expenses are to about 22.5 million, and this equals to about they're losing about 4 million. Not only are they losing about $4 million, but they're losing the school $4 million. Um, so the clear problem is that even though the organization has gotten better as a team, there has been a lot of expenses due to this. This could be, players getting paid more because of NAI deals. This is because coaches getting paid more. There's travel costs, recruiting budget in general, or just more money to the budget of the football team in general. So what's really causing the issue is that if you look deep down to the issue, it could be the fact that they spent around $22.5 million, with $7.7 million coming from coach's salary. Now, this in particular is actually considered very light according to recent coach's salary statistics. But keep in mind, this organization, this is the first time they've had very good season in a while, and not to mention they're not, a national championship caliber team yet. So I thought that was very, is a little bit ridiculous because it is a Division One school, but it is a mid-size athletic school. And this kind of translates to the fact, um, going into course concepts that we've learned when it comes to smaller universities, they're mainly tuition based. But when it comes to other universities, they like higher, Division One schools. Their revenue mainly comes from, excuse me, their revenue mainly comes from, success in their athletics and their media aspects. But with that being said, though, there has been a lot of, people say that there's been too much money sent over to football team, and because of that, you can probably put two and two together that other teams are not really being successful because most of the budget is going to the football team, even though the football team is losing money in general. There is a recording of students saying that in the student athlete representation, we love the success of the football team, but the resources feel uneven across teams. This kind of, you know, implies that most of the funding is going to football team. And the reason why this is very important because if the funding's not distributed equally, especially in a bigger school like a Division One school, if the funding's not divided equally for all those teams to have, it could affect the revenue not just of the football team but in general. Um, it's it needs all the athletics to make money, and if all funding's going to one team, that's not really that good. Also, it seems to be affecting the culture. Culture is very important, especially when it comes to loss in attendance. Student attendance is down about 25%. This also goes into seating capacity that has gone from 92 capacity to 74 capacity over the past 3 years, which I thought was very interesting to talk about. One idea that you really have to talk about the differences between like the universities, going back to the fact that even though it's a smaller mid-sized Division One school, um, they have no media revenue. They just had a bowl game, but in the statistics and overview, there was absolutely no listing of revenue coming from media streaming. So that's something very important. Um, to some organization goals that need to be addressed. The main goal is football team to create revenue instead of losing money. Also, we need to increase student attendance in football games to boost ticket revenue, but not just ticket revenue. Um, Going into just ticket sales in general. Ticket sales in general have dropped a lot, and it could be a number one of reasons. This could you know, be maybe people don't like the success. Maybe they becoming too big. Maybe, them beating up, all these teams is not enjoyable anymore. But that being said, there is some measurable objectives that we could do, and I could do as athletic director. We can measure the attendance and see if the increase in attendance correlates to a stronger revenue stream or not. We can do this with simple macro for AI. We can also see if that getting more funding from the boosters and just explain there needs to be more funding, if that could, translate to the football team success or not, but not only the football team, if we can figure out to get more funding from the boosters in general, we can see if that correlates to helping out, other teams as well. So for the decision making process, the main problem is overall problem. The football team is losing money despite having a lot of funding, but their expenses just go overboard way too much. The two alternatives for this situation is that we could either bring down the expenses now, even though they just had a winning season, or give the football team more money and hoping that it helps in the long run. One thing I think it's very important before I make my final decision, it's very important to realize that according to statistics right now, the most athletic football teams bring in the most revenue for the school. What I mean by that is if you look at any big size or medium sized D1 university, 9 times out of 10, the sports team that's bringing the most revenue for the school is a football team. But this is a big problem because in this situation, the football team is actually losing money for the school. So, as an athletic director in the situation, I have to look at the bigger picture for the university. I can't just have the happiness of, a few coaches in one sports team. I have to look at, athletics for the whole school and realize that, hey, we are university, we're for education, not just football, and definitely not just one sport. So, unfortunately, for the football team and the coaches, I'm going to have to bring down the budget of the football team until they at least create revenue. Just to justify my choice, these huge colleges with average football teams with smaller budgets and not the most talented football teams actually create more money than West Ridge is creating. The problem is that a lot of programs, even if they have like a 5-5 season, they still create revenue. West Ridge, despite having, last season going 10-2 and making a bowl appearance, has not created revenue, and that is not good. Um, there's not a reason for a football team. There's no reason that if our football team is getting more money, being more successful, has better coaches, has better staff, there's no reason why they can't figure out how to do the same. So, in this situation, as the athletic director, I hold the power. But it also seems like the head coach has the power because even though the head coach knows the budget's high, attendance is going down, they're not making revenue, they actually lost the school $4 million. He still thinks that he should ask more money just because they're having a good season, and then the next year they could have a potential championship run. I get his, you know, train of thought as a head coach, but as a director, I need to look at the bigger picture. Some political dynamics that exist that as a athletic director, I have to make sure that there's a fair budget for all. Yes, football is a big sport, and traditionally, college football usually gets a bunch of budget, more of the budget. This goes on to all levels, whether it's a giant school, giant, SEC school playing football, or a smaller high school. 9 times out of 10, the biggest budgets come from football, just because it is a very expensive sport. I understand that. But recent statistics, again, have said that the most college sport that brings in the most revenue is football. So it is really a big problem if this football team is actually losing the school $4 million. With that being said, the main conflict is that the head coach is not going to like my decision. He just had a great season, and now I have to drop his budget, or I have to say, hey, you have to figure out how to cut down your expenses because you're losing money. But he needs to understand that he hasn't really proven himself yet. He did have a great season, but for all I know, next season, they could go they could have a losing record. They could not win a game. Maybe my looking at the roster, they had a bunch of seniors that graduated, and they were starters too. I have to look at the bigger picture. I'm not just looking at the success. for, football team. I'm looking at specs for all athletics. Um, and what the organization, what we should do, and what I should do is, being in charge of this organization, is they need to find a way to cut down their expenses. Looking at their budgeting and their expenses, don't think it's fair to cut the salaries for the head coach and assistant coach. They do have debt payments and facilities, and I really can't like say, hey, you can't pay. Like I have to pay those off. The facilities are built like that's just how it is. So fortunately, we're gonna have to pay those off. So unfortunately, that leaves me with the best decision, and that is cutting out the recruiting budget. Now, with that being said, $4 million in recruiting budget, you can probably tell that this is probably NIL money. But as a athletic director, I need to think about the bigger picture and what the university stands for. We are allowing these kids to go to school and pursue an education, to play a sport they love and pursue an education, not get money. You know, so we need to make that abundantly clear. Um, One thing also is the reason why I wouldn't cut the budgeting from the assistant and head coaches is because actually, even though they had a really successful season, their salaries are actually considered pretty low. Found a recent statistic of salaries for head football coaches in college for the 2025 season. The head coach for West Ridge University would actually be ranked in between the 60 and 61 when it comes to most expensive head coach. Not to mention that most assistant coaches in general don't really make a lot. I actually found in their statistic that the most high paying assistant coach is a defensive coordinator from Georgia that gets around close to like $5 million per year. Um, this organization needs to also increase the attendance in stands, especially with students. They need to find out what the problem is. Ticket sales have been increasing for a 3-year span. That could definitely be a problem. Why ticket sales are dropping? If we bring those prices down, we bring in more people in the long run. We can bring that revenue back. Also, having fan surveys, for current and future and past fans could be, very beneficial for this situation, just to see our problem areas. So with that being said, and the risks and trade-offs, what I'm sacrificing is that the head coach might decide to quit, or the football team might not do the best do the best next year. With that being said, though, I don't really think that the boosters are going to back me up because they want to see more long-term success before they invest more money in one season doesn't go into them. So that's actually good for me because if I, cut their budget, boosters might, stop giving so much money. Who may resist? The football team and mainly the head coach and other coaches may resist. They may try to fight for it, but I need to let them explain the bigger picture. And I say, hey, just because you had one good season doesn't mean that you're doing all this and you're still losing a lot of money. What could go wrong is that doing this, biggest thing is that the long run, the net worth can actually worsen out because say like if next season they still have this high budget and they do absolutely terrible, then their revenue just plummets and then they actually lose more money. So just a little bit of reflection about the situation. If I was the athletic director in real life, would I make this decision? Yes, I would. I said it multiple times throughout this podcast. I have to look at the bigger picture, and one team is not, the whole athletic department of any organization. Whether you're an SEC school and a Division One school, or you're a small, Division 3 school, you have to look at the bigger picture for all teams. And I think it's very important to mention that most football teams do create a lot of revenue for their university, and the fact that this team is not creating revenue is a big problem and needs to be fixed. So, yes, I would make this decision in real life. Thank you for your time.